Thank you all for your time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Now we're moving on to Kenny Stein with Institute for Energy Research.
Mr. Stein? Mr. Stein, if you state your name, who you represent, and if you're for, against, or neutral on the subject we have at hand on proration.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Yes. My name is Kenny Stein. I represent the Institute for Energy Research. I'm policy director, and we are opposed to the proration decision. Mr. Chairman, Commissioners, thank you for this opportunity to provide comments. In addition to being policy director at IER, I'm also a native Houstonian, and I've lived through oil busts. I understand the impact of how low oil prices have on the state of Texas and the oil industry. The oil industry certainly faces an extraordinary combination of short-term factors, but these short-term factors can't be a justification for abandoning the competitive market policies that have created our domestic energy boom in the first place. Government-mandated proration will do long-term harm to the Texas oil industry while doing nothing really to help in the present. To begin with, Texas is simply too small a player for proration to have an impact. In all the scenarios that have been discussed today, halting all production in Texas would not even begin to cover the demand loss. When in the past proration was regularly used, Texas was a dominant producer of the world's oil supply. So when we're talking about the term waste from the 1930s, it has a very different context then than it does today. And I think the Commission should adjust its understanding of the term waste to match current circumstances. Frankly, proration is not an effective tool in the current global reality where Texas is just one of many producers. In the current situation, really the only price solution is getting the economy back up and running. Though proration would have virtually no impact on prices, would have substantial negative effects on the Texas oil industry. Across the board, proration would inevitably prop up weaker producers at the expense of stronger. And that's not just because exempting marginal wells puts the burden of proration on larger and more efficient producers. You know, as we've said, some companies have wells that are cheaper to produce from, some companies have better cash or debt balances, but forcing all producers to prorate indiscriminately eliminates the benefits of those distinctions. Prudent operators will end up being punished for their smart business practices. Proration also eliminates incentives for efficiency and innovation. During the last oil price drop in 2015 and 16, we saw that American producers are champion innovators. What's needed now is more of that kind of ingenuity, where we learn to produce more oil for less money. Any action to take prorate actually eliminates a lot of those incentives. If you're limited by a commission proration order, a producer that comes up with a great new technological breakthrough can't capitalize on it to produce more oil. This does long-term harm to the industry by suppressing the types of advances which will protect the industry from the next downturn. So these long-term impacts need to be taken into consideration, even though this is a short-term proration discussion. And I'll also add a policy advocacy warning. As someone who's spent most of the last decade battling on energy issues in Washington, D.C., the oil industry's most powerful and persuasive defense to political and regulatory attack has been its adherence to free market policies. Abandoning that position with proration means that the oil industry is just another sector seeking favor from government. Expanding the idea of waste, as has been discussed today, is also a long-term danger to the domestic oil industry as a whole, because this regulatory weapon can be used by those who would destroy the industry entirely. Some of the comments that we've heard that have been submitted for this meeting foreshadow. So for the long-term health of the Texas oil industry, the best approach is for production reductions to be made based on market signals. Each company has to assess its own situation, and as we have heard today, the variables are virtually endless. Importantly, these variables are completely different for each company, each field, and even each well. Attempting to centrally plan this adjustment through proration would only interfere with the market-driven process already underway and ultimately underline the long-term strength of the oil industry. The Commission should not attempt to substitute its own judgment in place of the wider wisdom created through the interaction of thousands of players in the oil markets. Thank you for the opportunity to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Stein. Are there any questions, members? I want to thank you for your good testimony. I appreciate so much your bearing with us for this late hour. And thank you so much for the work that you do and having worked up with the enemies in Washington for us in the industry too.